Import numbers are in, and what are flowers doing, and how are the flowers impacting Florida? Hey, everybody, welcome back to Data Day. It's going to be a good one today, gents. We got import numbers in, and then I know Jeff's not a fan, but I want to hear a little bit about this exotic plant situation going on down there in them there Floridas, Jeffrey, because we've been waiting for exotic plants up here in the north, and I'm really happy to hear that they're starting to come up because that means my wife and I can go get the big bright red flowers. I don't even know what they're called. But yeah, by the pool. So we love it. So, gents, how are we today? What's happening?
Yeah, good. Great.
Good
to be with you.
It's glad to be back.
Yes,
You know,
sir.
Dan,
We're
one of
glad
the-
to have you back, brother. We've missed you the last few weeks. You know,
Yeah.
gallivanting all over North America and then doing all that. But
It's all good. It's all good. All well worth it.
good. Diener,
Yep.
import numbers are in, and I know this was one
Yeah.
thing that we've talked about for the last few weeks that we're really looking forward to this because last month's numbers were up. So where are we sitting now?
Yeah, I was surprised by how strong March numbers were, because that's normally the low point post Chinese New Year. It was a bit later this year. I noticed the Logistics Managers Index came out yesterday and it dropped about 5.4 points, largely because of much lower inventory levels. I'm waiting for an answer back from Zach Rogers. I suspect the lower inventory levels in the first half of April are because of lower import volumes in March that took until the middle of April to pick up again. And that looks like what's happened because April numbers are up slightly. So we had a really strong March, and then April numbers are up about 4% month over month and year over year. So it's not a bigger
Nice.
jump from March to April as you would see in other years. So it's more flat, but it's flat only because we had a much stronger March number.
And I would still think that's a good sign, no?
Oh, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
Dan.
okay.
We still had 2.19, so 2.2 million TEU. For those that don't know, that's 20-foot equivalent unit, the 20-foot international shipping box. So that's still a really healthy number. And if you remember, during the pandemic, we talked about, and I quoted the guy that runs the Georgia Port Authority, who said that anytime we get above 2 million TEU for a consistent period of time, our supply chain gets into a lot of trouble, which we were north of 2 million TEU. We were up near 2.6 million TEU, I think, during the pandemic. I'll just look at the peak here. 2.7. We were at 2.7 million TEU in May of 2022. So, and I suspect the supply chain has adjusted to higher volumes over time. We've become more efficient. We've got more assets, more chassis trailers, all of those things that caused the supply chain disruptions. I suspect we've flattened out. A lot more infrastructure, a lot more warehouses around ports. We've got a lot more 53-foot boxes sitting around for the domestic moves. So sitting at about 2.2 million TEU, the next closest year was last year. So we're about 100,000 more containers than this time last year. So we're up about 4%, which is good news.
That is.
No change. Sorry?
No, I said that is good news.
Yeah. Los Angeles up. It's a bit of a resurgence in volume in Los Angeles. It was down last month slightly. This month it's up about 11%. New York was flat. Long Beach up 24%. So there was a resurgence in volume back to the West Coast. But again, that shouldn't be a surprise because about half of our containers come across the Trans-Pacific trade lane from Northern Asia, mostly China, into Los Angeles. So it's the major port for about half of our import volumes. And if Chinese New Year was a factor in March, well, then it follows that in April you'll see a resurgence of volume into Los Angeles from the Northern Asia ports. And if I look at North Asia, North Asia's flat. North Asia includes China. Southeast Asia up 26% year over year. So New York up. New York flat. Los Angeles, Long Beach up. Savannah flat. Houston down 4. Norfolk up 13. So kind of fairly normal data points here. If I take out the two pandemic years, impacted years of 21 and 22, this was the highest number of containers for the month of April, going back to 2017. So that's good
So I
news.
got a question for you, Dean. Which ports are absorbing the Baltimore port freight?
Great question, Dan. So when I looked at the data volumes, Savannah was one. So Savannah. So remember, in context, all of these ocean lines are automatically, well, not automatic. They're always calling on, Houston, Mobile, Tampa, Miami, Savannah, Norfolk, Baltimore, New York, Philly, right? So when they do their port calls, I mean, each ship doesn't call at each of those ports, but if you look at the port calls, I've got a good friend of mine that's on the OOCL Europe. He's the chief officer, and we talk over direct messaging quite a lot. He comes in across the Mediterranean out of the Suez Canal or around the Cape now, goes New York, Baltimore, Miami, Houston, Miami, Baltimore, New York, back through the Mediterranean. So they have this sort of a swing they do where sometimes they'll touch the ports twice to unload and reload. So to answer your question, the movement of containers that couldn't get unloaded in Baltimore didn't cause the shipping lines to have to change their routings necessarily, but they did have to drop more containers at ports they were already calling at.
Okay.
So Savannah was a big one for a lot of the roll on, roll off. Norfolk picked up most of it. Norfolk and New York. So when I looked at the data, about I'm going to say 70% of the containers looked like they were heading to New York, Port of New York and New Jersey, in Jeff's home in his backyard. And what the rail lines did is they built daily services from New York back down to Baltimore. So they were running containers on trains. They couldn't double stack them. I think there's some Baltimore Bridge Tunnel issues in terms of double stacking trains, containers. So there was a lot more volume moved back down. Of course, the port has opened up. They've just found the sixth body this week, tragically, and ships are moving. So, Dan, it caused a lot of disruption for about a 4-week period in terms of truckload volatility. But as we said from day one, this is a small freight market in the big scheme of things, but it's a very big flatbed market for roll
I'm
on,
just
roll off.
wondering if the Virginia one was up because of the Baltimore port. That was more like where my head was going. I'm wondering because
Well, no,
that
I
seems
think,
like a really big spike.
yeah, I think you're right. So Savannah, Norfolk up 13%. So let me
Yeah.
click on Norfolk and see where that sits relative to prior years. So there you go. So it's a really good question and very insightful of you. Norfolk volumes are the highest in the month of April, going back to 2017.
Okay.
So they picked up a good chunk of the volume. They are at about 137,000 TEU. Again, furniture, plastic products, auto parts, trucks, sheets, towels, paper products. The other one was New York. So let me have a quick look at New York and see where it ranked. It got a surge in volume in March because most of the volume went in there. Because I think we still had a week of. So remember, we still had a week of the month to go when the bridge went down, and a lot of those vessels just turned and burned straight to New York. So I think it's about a day's sailing to New York. So a lot of that TEU volume that got diverted would have been captured in the month of the last week of March. So that's why March volumes were up there. But it took a bit of time to get the volumes moving to the other ports. Let me look at Savannah. Dan, Savannah was flat, so no noticeable change there. Norfolk was the big one. So they picked up a lot of volume because it's the closest. And I don't have Baltimore. Break bulk tonnage is still very strong into the Gulf Coast area. I wrote a piece on break bulk tonnage this week in my blog post. I think it's this week or maybe last week. If I quickly go in and I can tell you what the break bulk numbers are, because I think this is important for flatbed carriers, because we talk about containerized freight all the time, but break bulk really is a fairly big flatbed market. Break bulk tonnage down slightly, down 5% month over month, but not off the radar in terms of where it would normally be. But most of your volume, the majority of your volume is Houston, Freeport, New Orleans, a little bit of Corpus Christi. So your break bulk tonnage, which is mostly steel, rebar steel, what rebar, flat bar, rebar, coil, all that scrap steel. And what really surprised me when I wrote this piece about break bulk tonnage was most of it comes from Brazil. I had no idea Brazil was such a big manufacturer of steel. So it turns out it's a really big one. So
There's
steel
actually a
production.
lot of areas around the world that I find surprised me when I started doing ocean.
Yeah,
Like one of the
right.
biggest ones was we were moving, got to be 300 containers, 250 containers a month from Portugal of
Yep.
quartz.
Right.
And
Yeah.
normally it came from Israel.
Right. Yep.
And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a different color pattern or something different, but it was amazing the
Yeah.
amount of
Yeah.
quartz slabs we pulled out of Portugal.
Yeah.
Like Israel, you would assume, right, just because of the
Right.
rock structures and
Right.
everything, and just the way it's laid out.
Mm.
But it was amazing to see the volume coming out of some
Yeah.
of these areas, and pharmaceuticals too. You'd be
Yeah.
amazed at where some of these components for pharmaceuticals come from, like
Right.
places you're going, what? But
Yeah.
then again,
Well,
on the flip side of it, I got a buddy that owns a place in Panama. And he was saying, he goes, Dan, you go up into like the rainforest in Panama. He goes, the cure for every disease is in there. You just got to find it. He goes, like, it
Right.
is
just
insane.
walk in.
Like, like nothing like what we've seen. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting where things come from in the world. That's
When I
amazing.
was when I was truck driving in Sydney, I was pulling containers off the Sydney wharf, and we'd always have these 20-foot boxes come in, and they were granite, like granite, quartz, all that sort of stuff, heavy as anything you could imagine, but full of the nastiest things you could imagine. Every single time we'd pick the box up, we'd have to go to what we call fumo, which is to go to the special place to have it fumigated. And you'd pull up back onto the dock, and you'd sort of open the doors from a distance as far as you could and just jump, because you didn't know what was going to come out of the back of that thing. There were some nasty things like centipedes and spiders. Like, we have some of the nastiest spiders and snakes in Australia, so we kind of grow up and we're not scared of them. But these containers had stuff in them that were just not seen before in biology.
So, I mean, to me, and I mean, I don't know. I used to have a major fear for spiders and that whole arachnophobia. Like, I don't know if you guys remember that movie, but
Oh yeah,
how the spider
Arachnophobia.
came in on like this a container from, the rainforest, and like, I don't know. I don't know about you guys, but every week up here, anyways, we hear about a new beetle or a new bug or a new something
All right.
that's eating trees or something, and it's crazy. And you sit there and start thinking, where the hell are all these things coming from? Which is actually a great segue because we get a lot of bugs in plants, Jeff.
We do.
Yes.
Oh, nice
What?
work.
Did you guys see
You
that
could
segue?
you could be a podcast host one day. You're good at this. You're good at this. Damn. I thought I was pretty good at segues.
He was
I'm
practicing
trying,
this
Dean.
before we went.
I'm trying my best, brother. That's
Yeah.
hilarious. So Jeffrey, I know you have a little bit of quick pro quo when it comes to exotic plants. Talk to us.
Yeah. So I have a friend I went to high school with, and he's an arborist, and he had I forgot 100 acres of land down in Florida, and for some reason he sold it and he started working for this other I guess what do you call it, botanical or something like that, with exotic plants that only grow in the heat and need a lot of sun and all this stuff, out of Homestead, Florida. And the amazing thing about that is the number of loads that they ship within a very short period of time. They're all logistics trailers, E-Track, multi-level, hand stacked. And the way that they load these trailers down there, Dan, is that they have this cement slab that's down. They don't have a dock that you can bump into where you roll in this material and offload it really easy. They have to use a forklift to put it into the back of the truck. They have a pallet jack that brings it to the front of the truck. Then they have to hand load it and stack it up above on the plywood separators and all this. And it's all multi-stop. And they do about 700 to 900 loads within a 7, 8, maybe 9 week period of time. I mean, it's a dirt road that goes all the way down to where they keep all these plants, and there's no dock, and it's just around the clock, just backing in, loading, a lot of labor, like around the clock. And they go to the Home Depots, the Lowe's, the Walmarts of the world, all over the place in the Northeast and the Midwest. And it's just repetitive, multi-stop, very, very hard work. he wanted me to get involved. And I was like, hell no. I don't want to do that kind of stuff. No way. That's not my niche. But it's unbelievable what they do in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
It's a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was talking to our broker friends this week that were moving some freight volumes, and the rates really peaked over the weekend, last weekend. That's when, the peak shipping volume for those listening are last week and this week. So last week is really when the volumes start to move and capacity really tightens. This year, I think there's been a real capacity crunch for northbound refrigerated trailers out of Florida for some reason. Both dry van and reefer rates have gone through the roof. To give you a sense of where they are, the April average for reefer northbound Miami, Atlanta, which is a big lane for the floral movement, sits about $1.40 a mile, like in April, like not fantastic, but it's 278 today, 278 today. So it's so it's up substantially. If I look at Ratecast's history always has a spike in this time of the year. So it peaked at about May 12. So it's going to drop from 278 to by probably it's going to drop to 228 by Mother's Day. So in terms of the rate volatility, the worst of it's over for the floral part of it. But the big question that we always get asked is why Florida and why Miami? And the big reason is that around 93% of our imports of roses and carnations come from Colombia and Ecuador, some from Guatemala, but they all land in Miami Airport. About 7% of volume goes to the West Coast, but 93% last year came into Miami. The real reason is Miami's refrigerated infrastructure has been built around sort of the scale and economies of international air freight. Miami's a really good jumping off point for freight all over the world. So there's a lot of traffic opportunities for non-flour freight to and from Central America and the deep south of America, South America. So you have a lot of freighters fly multi-stop schedules to maximize their loads sort of across all of the seasons. So what you've got is a lot of capacity already going through Miami. And what happens is at this time of the year, and I've got Flight Radar 24 up and running as I'm talking to you. So the last 2 weeks I've been tracking 747s and the 767s running back and forward between Colombia and Miami and Ecuador and Miami on a daily basis. I'm counting around 35 to 40 loads for air freighters a day so far. So think about, these are 70-ton loads. When you look at the volume, flowers sort of cube out a bit quickly, quicker than they weigh out. But my colleagues in the air freight industry suggest that every jumbo jet of flowers translates to about 3 53-foot vans, because you can't stack them to the roof because the boxes are terrible and they collapse under the weight. Yep. Some of them are hand stacked on the floor. One of my friends that runs flowers, her last load, she had 2,500 boxes in the trailer. Front floor load, 2,500, and it was a 4-drop load, with lumpers. So it's a terrible freight for a lot of these carriers. Terrible. They do not like it. But
you don't want to move. They do move it, but you don't want to move it. It's no way.
So the other thing that's happening is looks like Florida's produce season has peaked early. So the rate movement out of Florida for those buying capacity peaked. Looks like over the weekend it'll drop off after Mother's Day pretty quickly, and then won't pick up for a little while. I don't think it'll pick up until normally. Yeah, you'll see a little bit towards the end of the year, but the Florida produce season, once you get past Mother's Day, is kind of done because it gets too hot. So you've gone through So that's what's happening out of there. But it's I don't know. We did our Ratecast forecast on the show yesterday, and you'll know we've talked about this a million times, but in produce season, reefer rates go up from the middle of April to July for about 25 cents a mile. We're only forecasting about 10 cents a mile lift this year. So that's in line with 2019. It's in line with some last year where the rates were fairly soft and the volumes were soft. So it doesn't look like at this early stage produce season is going to provide that lift that we would normally expect. And I say that there's two reasons. One is one of our questions on the show yesterday was the Mexico exports are less profitable because of the change in the peso. So it's more costly to export to the US. So produce volumes out of Mexico are down about 20% year over year. The change in the peso could be part of that. Florida volumes are about 8% lower year over year. So when you look at the total market where produce volumes are kind of up year over year, they're not up by any level that you would say it's a great produce season underway, because it's dragged down by Mexico and Florida, who are year over year lower. So, and there's a couple of reasons. One, I mean, I think the Florida season is probably reflective of consumer demand. Like we're buying differently this year, we're buying less of it, I guess. So that's where we sit. But I mean, there still will be a produce season. There still will be some lift, but we've still got a lot of capacity in the market. Someone asked yesterday, said, well, if volumes are up, like loads moved are up year over year, why aren't rates up? And I said, well, it's too many trucks. Like, there's still a lot of trucks in the market. When you get into the specialized loads, I think capacity is much tighter. Like if you're running cherries have started pumping out of Lodi, California, where the Bing cherry comes from. You're going to find them very expensive to move because it's a high value cargo that needs really specialized new equipment. But if you're talking just general spring vegetables out of Florida, that's a different equation. There'll be ample capacity for that. So that's where we sit. Produce season looks like it'll be, pretty good. But as I said on the show yesterday, it feels like and looks like from the data that the Mexico and Florida produce seasons have already peaked, which is about 3 weeks earlier than when they would normally peak when you look at the shape of the line graphs based on prior years.
Which actually makes sense when we look, well, I mean, for us anyways, up here, it makes, and Jeff, actually the three of us can attest to it. We're about 3 weeks early from winter ending.
Right.
Like if we look at, I look at, we were out last weekend speaking to somebody at a garden center, and he was saying, well, he says, it's interesting because already we're in double digits overnight. Normally, my wife and I are buying, so like kind of how it works every year is we buy all our flowers for the house on Mother's Day weekend. And usually they sit in the garage for a good week to 2 weeks before we put them outside because it's too cold at night and it messes with the flowers. Yeah, I got to cover them and stuff. But I mean, now 99% of our trees have bloomed fully. Yes. There's people with flowers outside, so it's like we're a good 3 weeks to a month early on everything, so it makes sense.
It's a good point, Dan. Remember on the show about a month ago, we said that one of my barometers for flatbed demand and seasonality is the flatbed loads of bagged garden mulch coming from Maine on flatbeds to Home Depot and Lowe's parking lots. Notice it said parking lots, not car parks.
Oh, Diener, you're becoming Americanized.
After 24 years, I'm getting it right.
No, that's a statement. Because the Home Depots around here, their lots are filled with these mulch bags. I mean, we're talking like truckloads of them all over the place.
And in February, as we talked about at the top of the show, in February, so not only was I seeing garden mulch moving much earlier in February, way before spring officially started, but I was seeing the sort of the bellwether in my mind of planting season, which are the large trees you see on flatbeds covered in tarps, like the massive palm trees, right?
Yep.
They started moving much earlier in February because when you start seeing those loads on flatbeds, spring season is around the corner because someone's digging a hole somewhere for a tree.
Well, something, I mean, listen, I'm not preaching to the choir here, but the weather cycle is changing drastically over the last couple of years. It's getting hotter quicker. We're having more tornadoes. We're having more rain and very unusual weather. That's dictating a lot of different things now.
Did you see that warehouse in Oklahoma get destroyed by the tornado? Like 70 people.
The Dollar Tree distribution center. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Like that's just.
Did you see all the merchandise in there? We're talking like thousands and thousands of truckloads. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was like
I love the dollar stores, and when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much good stuff scattered.
I know.
But did you see that? Like, here's the good and bad, right? The bad is the weather. But I don't know if you read the comments. I shouldn't be laughing, but because it was awful. But
Yeah.
I had to chuckle because someone said, "Oh, well, we don't need UPS anyway because those packages are flying somewhere on their own." I thought, dude, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, man. That's
I don't
not
know
that's
if they-
wrong.
You know what, Diener? That's just people
brutal.
online, buddy.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody's
It's a
going to have
brutal
their own.
place.
And it's funny until it happens to you, right?
Yes,
And then all of
exactly.
a sudden you change your tune. It's just like nobody does anything until there's a
Yep.
catastrophe, which
Yeah.
triggers a option to put something in place so it never happens again. But they have to wait until a catastrophe happens for somebody to react, which is bullshit. They should be thinking about those things now. Unbelievable.
It's like when people these days don't use a handbrake; they just throw it in park and then jump out, and the car's rocking back and forth. And I'm thinking, obviously, you've never had a car take off on you because that's dumb as anything.
Wait until that happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Especially
With
old
the
school
car
standard
behind you.
cars when
Oh,
you
yeah.
used to have to park when you're parking on a hill. I remember vividly. You're parking on
On
a
the
hill, you put it
wheel.
in first, you put the parking brake on, you turn your wheel so your wheels go to the curb, so you don't, right? Like there's all these little maneuvers. Now you just go, a lot of them, it's just a button and you're like, you're out of here, let's go. But
Yeah.
awesome. All right, gents. Well, we will see you next week. What's coming up next week, Dean?
So next week we've got a lot of travel. On our show next week we have, the name escapes me very quickly. Who have we got? It is, give me a second while I look for this. It is Heather Dawn from Dawn Transfer. From memory, they move a lot of batteries. They're a battery specialist shipper, so I think that's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm off to Dayton Freight in Indianapolis. I'm speaking at the KSM Advisors Conference.
Nice.
They have their annual conference. They're a consulting firm that does a lot of work for truckload carriers. Doing a sleep class for Dayton Freight truckers in Indianapolis on Wednesday night before they go out on their line runs. And then we're off to Hilton Head, South Carolina for our DAT symposium for all of our top 100 brokers that we do each year. So it's going to be a good weekend. And a bucket list item will be checked off on Saturday next week, which is I'm going to sit on the boardwalk in Savannah and watch those big cargo ships come past within like 50 feet of you.
Hey,
Nice.
Dean, I got something for you to analyze next week. 2 things.
Okay.
All right. The impact with Arnold dissolving and going bankrupt, and also Ravens Transport out of Florida. Another big one. We're talking like over 500 drivers, over 500 trucks, 400 plus with Arnold, and about 100 with Ravens. And what will the impact be if CNKC goes on strike?
Homework. Okay. Noted.